The following program is brought to you by the friends and partners of Andrew Wommack Ministries, celebrating 50 years of sharing God's unconditional love and grace.
You know what, little me, I can go out and do big things for God. And that keeps me going, to know that every day I can wake up and God's going to use little me in a big way.
Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack, a teaching ministry that focuses on God's unconditional love and grace. And now, Andrew continues teaching from the life-changing Word of God.
Welcome to our Tuesday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing to teach on how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. And this coming Friday is going to be my last day to teach on this on television, and I encourage you to please get the materials. I've not only got this book, but I've got it in Spanish here, and then we have 3 sets of either CDs or DVDs where I taught 5 teachings on how to find God's will, 5 teachings on how to follow, and then 5 teachings on how to fulfill. We've also got study guides that go along with it, and we've got a little DVD of destiny stories, people who have experienced God's will. We tell the story and it'll be inspirational to you. And then this week, I'm teaching from Romans chapter 1, verse 21, and this is basically a teaching that I give in this teaching on how to discover the keys to staying full of God. Now, this teaching in the book form and CDs and DVDs that I have, it's in more detail than what I'm doing right here. So this is an abbreviated form of it that I've put into how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. If you wanted the whole thing, you'd need to get this teaching on Discover the Keys to Staying Full of God. But again, this coming Friday is going to be my last time to offer this over television, and I encourage you to please get this series. And even if you've heard everything I've said, it makes a bigger impact when you get it to where you can listen to it without being broken into little 30-minute segments. And also, this is the kind of thing that every single person in the world needs to hear this. It would transform people's lives if they really understood that God had a perfect plan for their life, that they had to discover it. They had to follow God's leadership, not try and do it in their own way, and then how to fulfill, how to continue long-term with patience through these things. It would just transform people's lives. So this would be a good thing for you to get and give to somebody else. Yesterday, Romans 1:21, I was showing that it says we all have this intuitive knowledge of God on the inside of us, but we can deaden ourselves to it. God does not force Himself upon us. And so a person can walk away from what God is revealing to them in their heart. They can deaden themselves to it to the point that it goes down here in verse 28, Romans 1:28, and says that they can become reprobate. And that means that they have no knowledge, no conviction of God in them whatsoever. You can arrive at that place, but you never start there. Every single person has had God reveal Himself to that person, but you can harden yourself against it. So how do you do that? Romans 1:21 gives you 4 things, and it even lists more than that as you go on through the rest of this chapter. But I'm focusing on 4 things in Romans 1:21 that people do to harden themselves towards God. The first thing is they don't glorify Him as God. And this word glorify, I talked about this on my program yesterday, but that means to value or to prize God the way that they should. Basically, it just means that people do not put the proper value on God and what God has done in their life. And because of that, Satan is able to steal it away. In verse 21, it says, because that when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. 4 things listed here, and I believe that they are in sequence. It's a progression. The very first thing that has to happen for what God has done in your life to be diminished and quit having the impact on you that it should is that you have to quit valuing God the way that you should. And that may not register with you, but let me give you an illustration of this, that on March the 23rd, 1968, God showed up big time in my life. God revealed Himself to me. And I was so full of the love of God. It was tangible. For 4.5 months, I was so overwhelmed with God's love for me that I couldn't sleep or eat. Now, I did sleep and I did eat, but I couldn't sleep like a normal thing. I would stay up all night long studying, and I'd just fall asleep an hour at a time. And I was just so excited about the Lord, I couldn't sleep. And I never sat down and ate a meal. I was so excited over God's love for me that I just grabbed something and go, but I just couldn't sit and eat the way that I used to. I was so excited about the Lord that it just consumed me. And I was valuing what God had done. So this was a Saturday night, March the 23rd, 1968. The very next morning in my Baptist church, I was not prone to stand up in front of a group. I was an introvert. But I was just so excited about God that I stood up in front of my Baptist church and I said, I don't know what happened to me. I said, but I was filled with God's Spirit. And I'm going to be serving God the rest of my life. Did you know if I would have committed adultery, they would have been easier on me than when I said I was filled with the Spirit. I had the pastor of the church come to me and say, who do you think you are? The Apostle Paul was filled with the Spirit. Peter was filled with the Spirit, but we can't be filled with the Spirit. And they just immediately pounced on me. And I told them, I said, look, I don't mean to offend anybody. I may not be saying it right, but I said that's just the closest I could get to what happened. I was just filled with the Spirit of God. And so here's my point. It says before you lose what God has done in your life, you've got to quit glorifying Him as God. That means you have to quit valuing and prizing what God has done. So I used this example yesterday, like you got this fulcrum in the middle and then you have a seesaw. If one end is up, the other end has to be down. So here I was putting great glory, value, prizing what God had done in my life. And here came the pastor of the church and all of the leaders of the church. And they started saying, how dare you say that you're filled with the Spirit? And they started devaluing my experience and trying to decrease it. Now, if I would have valued their opinion, and remember, I was an 18-year-old boy. I didn't know anything. These guys had been through seminary. And they were supposed to know what they were doing. And if I would have valued their opinion more than what happened to me, it would have been like this. But by the grace of God, I didn't even know what I'm telling you right now, but I just knew that God had touched my life, and man, I was going to keep valuing God. And I just refused to allow the pastor of the church, the leaders of the church that were criticizing me to begin to devalue. I kept putting value on what God had done. And because of it, did you know I just kept walking in the joy of this. And here I am 50 years later, still reveling in what God did in my life. It has never left. It has never decreased. Now, there are some times that I'm more aware of it. I'm dealing with other things. But I have never just gone the other direction. And I've never reached a place to where, oh God, I've lost what you did in my life, March the 23rd, 1968. No, it's increased. And one of the reasons is because I kept valuing what God did even when people criticize it. You know, let's just say that somebody's watching this program and God speaks something to you and you get so blessed and you say, man, that was a word from God. But then you go to work, and if you were at work and you started saying, man, God showed me this, and you share something, and if the person you shared with doesn't value it the way that you do, there is a tendency for you to immediately begin to start decreasing your value on it. And you say, well, they don't value it. The people at my workplace, they don't value God the way I do. And if you have to be accepted in order for you to feel good, and if people's rejection of you is such a thing that you just can't live without it, and you value their opinion, well, then I guarantee you the value you've placed on what God has done will come down. And that's how you lose it. I'm telling you, it's just the way that it works. So people came out against me and attacked me over this thing. And they began to start criticizing me. You know, I had another example just a few months after this. The Lord told me to quit school. I was in my first year of college at the time that this happened, 1968. And the very first thing the Lord told me to do was to quit college. So it took me a couple of months to get to where I finally acted on that. But when I quit college, immediately I was reclassified as 1A for the draft. This is during the height of the Vietnam War, 1968. And so they sent me for a pre-induction physical to see if I was even eligible to be drafted. I passed the physical, and so because of this, I had a recruiter come out to my house. Now you have to remember, I was probably 19 by this time. But here I was, a young guy that had just been walking with the Lord, and as far as this experience I'd had just a few months, I didn't know very much of the Word, I didn't know much of anything. And here I was, a 19-year-old kid, and into my house walks this recruiter. He was probably 30-something years old. He was wearing a uniform. He was a representative of the government, an authority figure. And he came and started trying to tell me all of the benefits of joining the Army versus being drafted. If I joined, they might be able to send me to Korea or some other place, and I might be able to avoid Vietnam. And he was giving his spiel. And he had all of his material spread out on this table. And anyway, I said, I could save both of us a lot of time. And he says, how's that? And I said, the reason that you're here and the reason I was classified 1A was because I quit school. And he said, that's right. And I said, but God told me to quit school. So I'm doing what God told me to do, and I just am not worried about it. And he kind of snickered, and he says, well, he says, you are going to Vietnam. And I said, no, if God wants me drafted, I'll be drafted. And if he doesn't, I said, I won't. And I mean, the guy just broke out laughing. And he says, boy, I can guarantee you are going to Vietnam. And when he said that, you know what was happening? Here I was valuing God and valuing what God said about me and thinking that God is greater than the U.S. government. He's greater than anything, and I was valuing God. Here comes along a man who his value on God was next to nothing. He was valuing his position and all of this, and he mocked and says, I can guarantee you, it doesn't matter what God's told you, you're going to Vietnam. He didn't value God the way that I did. Now, I had a choice right then. I could either esteem him and say, well, he's a representative of the government, and I could have been afraid of him and have valued his opinion more than I did God. And if I'd have done that, then I can guarantee you that experience I'd had with the Lord would have lost its impact in my life, and it would have ceased to have been the motivation and the direction that it is today. But by the grace of God, I was not going to let this guy devalue God and this experience that I had in my life. And I mean, when he laughed at me and said, you're going to Vietnam, boy, it made me mad. So here I was, a 19-year-old kid, and he was 30-something in a uniform, a representative of the government. I got right up in his face, put my finger in his chest like this, and told him, buddy, I did what God told me to do, and if God wants me drafted, I'll be drafted, and if he doesn't, I won't. And I said, not you or the United States government or any demon in hell can draft me if God doesn't want me drafted. You know what? I just kept glorifying God. And most people wouldn't do that. Man, this is offensive. This guy could do something to you. He's a representative of the government, but see, I just kept glorifying God. And he just got all of it. He never said a word. Got all of his stuff, packed it up, put it in his briefcase, walked out. And the very next day, I had my draft notice in the mail. And I wished I'd have checked. I've thought about this a lot since that. I bet you that he processed that himself. It probably didn't have a stamp on it. It probably didn't come through the mail. I bet you he processed that and went and stuck it in my mailbox just to show me that, he was stronger than God. But I didn't care what he did. As far as I was concerned, that was absolutely true. God wanted me drafted. And did you know it turned out, in hindsight, to be one of the best things that's ever happened to me? I mean, in Vietnam, I was forced into serving God, to studying the Word 15 hours a day. It's the only way I could keep my sanity. And I didn't intend on it, but when I went into Vietnam, I was a Baptist. When I came out, I wasn't a Baptist. I had renewed my mind by the Word, and when I got back, the Baptists didn't want me. They asked me to leave because I'd received the baptism of the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues. And so they kicked me out. And I didn't intend on that. It probably wouldn't have ever happened, or it wouldn't have happened the way it did if I had stayed back in the States or something. It turned out to be a good thing in hindsight. And so the point that I'm making is that, see, here God had spoken into my life, and I was placing value on Him and other people, even representative of the government. Even when it looked like it could cost me my life. Going to Vietnam could have killed me. I nearly died twice in one day. And there was all kinds of things that were vying for the value that I was placing on God. But by the grace of God, I just kept honoring and glorifying God, keeping everything else relatively low. And because of it, I can say 50 years later that I have never lost the benefit of what God did in my life. It is still alive. It's still functional today. And in contrast to this, I can show you so many people that God has touched their life. They had some kind of an experience. They think, I'll never be the same again. And it just seems to expire after a while. It seems to lose its potency. And then after a while, people have to go back and have some kind of a new touch from God because they've just lost the benefit of what God has done in the past. It shouldn't be like that. And the only reason it is like that with most people is because some way they didn't keep valuing what God had done in their life. They let other things compete. Sometimes it's not an out-and-out rejection of the Lord or what He's done, but it may just be that you get occupied with life. The cares of this life and other things enter in and it chokes the Word. But regardless, you got to just keep the value on God. I'm talking about how you fulfill God's will. This is one of the ways you do it. You've got to prize what God has done in your life, His purpose for your life. And you've got to put so much value on it that you don't let anything else compete. You know, there was a time in my poverty days, back when I was first in ministry, that a guy came to me with a multi-level marketing thing. And he invited me to his house. I ate with him. He showed this. And he showed me that, you know, for 10 hours a week, I could make just buku amount of money. I needed the money. That was no question. This is back before Jamie and I began to prosper, and I needed the money. And so it was appealing to me, and I prayed about it. And I'm not saying that it's wrong for anybody to be in these multi-level marketing things. That's not my point. I'm just saying that for me, I prayed about it. God, should I do this? And the Lord didn't tell me that the multi-level marketing was wrong or anything like that. What He spoke to me about was, Paul said in Philippians chapter 3, this one thing I do. And he told me, he says, don't divert your attention away from the ministry and away from what I've called you to do. He says this would take time and energy on your part that would take away from the gospel. And I really believe that one of the keys to success is you got to do one thing. And all you got to do to kill a man's vision is give him two. That you call that division. Two visions. We've got to be single upon what God has called you to do. And for me, God told me not to let anything else come in. And I'm telling you, this is one of the ways that you fulfill God's will, is you just get single-minded. You get to where this is all you do. Now, I'm not saying that you don't ever take a vacation or do anything like that, but I'm saying that your whole life needs to be focused. The power of a laser lies in the fact that all of that energy is focused into a pinpoint. You can literally cut through metal with a laser if it's focused, but you divert it, you just diffuse it, and that same light won't do a single thing. You've got to be focused. And this is what so many scriptures talk about. This is part of valuing God. You got to place a value on what God has called you to do and not let anything else come in and take away your attention from that. You can't let anything else compete. And I made this point before, but going back to this seesaw illustration, if one end is up, the other one's down. You can't have things like this. It can't be that here's God and here's other things just right underneath it. They aren't quite as much as God, but they are really close. No, that's not the way that it works. It's like this. If God is going to be absolute in your life, everything else relatively has to be nothing. And that is a huge statement right there. That's a huge statement. There's a lot of people that honestly, they value so many other things other than God and His will. You know, I've got a nice house. I've got nice cars. I've had these things given to me, and I enjoy them, and I praise God for them. But you know what? I would give it all up in a second if that's what God told me to do. There is not even any competition. If God told me for some reason to move out of my house, move to Africa, or to do something, I'd do it. I guarantee you there's nothing that occupies me more than God. You can't let your retirement, you can't let your friends, your family. You know, we've had people before that God has told them to come to school, and yet they have family, they have kids, they have grandkids, and they just can't bring themselves to part with their family. And again, I understand family is important. I'm not saying that you don't love your family, but I can show you many, many people that have left family, that have left grandkids, that have left houses and lands and all of these things for the sake of the Lord and come to Bible college, and God just blesses them. Some of them now are on foreign fields. Some of them are in other countries of the world. And I'm thinking of Dottie Heyman right now, that she had never left her holler in West Virginia, but God told her to come to Bible college. She came out here with her 2 dogs, and she's wound up in Kenya, and she has been there for 11 or 12 years, has never been back home. She's got grandkids that she's never seen. And some people think that's just terrible, but she has valued God. And because of it, there's now 14 or 15 kids in Kenya that have her as their mom that would have been dead. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. They would have been dead. They are alive today because of what Dottie Heyman is doing. And she has a house there now that is paid for. She's not only ministering to these kids, but she's feeding widows. She spends over $2,000 a month on food for other people and is helping them, and she's making her life count. And there's a lot of people that would never place that much value on what God has told them. But Dottie has, and I can guarantee you in eternity, I can guarantee you that there's going to be a great reward for Dottie Heyman. She's enjoying it now. She says she's the most blessed woman on the face of the earth. She's just thrilled with what God's doing, but in heaven, her reward's going to be great. Am I telling you that you shouldn't honor your children and grandchildren and things like that? No, but if God tells you to do something, you have to value God, and relative to that, nothing is important. Did you know Abraham did not fully obey God when he first called him? He brought his nephew Lot with him. And I'm sure that the logic was, God told him to leave his brethren. That included his nephew. But I'm sure Abraham was thinking that Lot's dad is dead. I'm the closest relative. I need to take care of him. So anyway, he compromised and didn't do completely what God told him to do. What was the result of that? Well, Lot went into Sodom and Gomorrah and wound up having the entire area destroyed, and 2 of his daughters died. His wife turned into a pillar of salt, and his remaining 2 daughters wound up getting pregnant by him. Incestual relationship. How could it have been any worse if he had just obeyed God and not brought Lot with him? You can't out-reason God. Just do whatever God tells you.
Our lives were turned right side up when we came to an Andrew Wommack event back in 2006. Our daughter Hannah was just given 2 weeks to live, but at that conference she was prayed for, and praise God, she was miraculously healed, and she's 100% well to this day.
Since Hannah was healed, we found that there have been many people that have been healed at Andrew's events.
It's not a question of will He heal you, He's already healed you.
To be encouraged, and that's what has happened here. It's really just encouraged and motivated me even more.
It's absolutely life-changing.
The presence of God was so overwhelming when he went through the doors. It was really something that got my attention just walking into that.
The next Gospel Truth Conference is in Chicago, Illinois, August 23rd through the 25th, with guest speaker Keith Moore. Register today at awmi.net/conferences. On today's program, Andrew mentioned his teaching titled, Discover the Keys to Staying Full of God. This product is available for a gift of any amount when you contact us. Discover how to live out and accomplish God's will for your life when you get Andrew's teaching titled How to Find, Follow, and Fulfill God's Will. It's available in a book in English or Spanish for a gift of any amount. This series is also available as 3 individual teachings: how to find God's will, how to follow God's will, and how to fulfill God's will. They're each available in a CD or DVD album recorded live at a Gospel Truth seminar, or they're each available as individual companion study guides. Each of these resources is available for a gift of any amount.
I'd like to encourage you to get this product that I have on how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. This book is actually a combination of 3 separate teachings. I've got a teaching, 5 parts on how to find God's will, 5 parts on how to follow God's will, 5 parts on how to fulfill God's will, and all 3 of these are combined into this one book. So we have the teaching on either CD or DVD. We've got the book. I've also got a book in Spanish, and then we have 3 study guides that will go through each one of these parts. And a bonus offer is our Destiny Stories DVD about people who have found God's will and are living it out in their life. It will be a blessing to you.
You can get all 3 of these products in the God's Will package. This package includes the book, all 3 study guides, and your choice of either all 3 CD albums or all 3 DVD albums. Order the God's Will package today, and you'll also receive the most recent Destiny Stories DVD, Destiny Stories Volume 2. This entire package has a catalog value of $195, but you can get it today for just $135. Today's audio teaching is titled, What About Your Values? It's available for a gift of any amount when you write or call. We encourage everyone to give, but if you're simply unable to afford it, Andrew and his partners will provide this CD free of charge. This is the last day we'll be offering this teaching, so be sure to respond today. You can order resources or become a Grace Partner through our website at awmi.net. Or call our helpline Monday through Friday from 4:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Our helpline number is 719-635-1111. To write us, use the address on your screen. We appreciate your generosity and hope to hear from you today.
I'd like to encourage you to check out our Inside Story on our website. This is where we interview people behind the scenes. Go check it out at awmi.net and then check on the Inside Story. It'll be a blessing to you.